Here you are, BPMs high, sweat dripping, body moving, tongue panting. You're working hard, real hard, and you're thirsty. You need vitamins, nutrients for peak performance and energy. And your plants do too. Aw, I mean, just look at the little guy. Water-soluble plant food from Miracle Grow is full of essential nutrients. Just a little scoop into your watering can and boom, instant feeding and bigger, more beautiful plants. It's kind of like a sports drink for your plants. You may have to suffer from heat, but your plants do not.
A lot of times when we feel that stuckness and all these other anger experiences of feeling like we can't move forward and we're like, there's a gridlock with where we're at. I'm like, there's probably something really painful we have to accept about our life and about life itself, which means there's something we need to let go of. Every time you let go, you begin again. And every time you begin again, a part of you is born again. You thought at 32 you'd be here by now, but you're not. You want to be mad, you want to blame people, okay, but eventually, you know what? You have to accept that. You're not where you thought you would be. That's a hard thing to accept when you've worked hard and experienced suffering and disappointment. Letting go is not one thing we do. Letting go is that which maintains the flow of everything we do.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. This is Dr. Tom coming at you. I'm walking around my hall in the church right now because I've had a really long day and I got to get my blood moving. And I have another meeting tonight later on. But I just am processing some things because I just had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine, Kevin Sweeney. Now, he is an author, a church planter, an entrepreneur, and a spiritual director, and many more things. We talk about that. And what you're going to be surprised about is the amount of wisdom that comes out of this guy I wouldn't expect it coming from, a younger guy like Kevin. Just the amount of wisdom that comes out of him, I'm expecting that to come from, some of my elders or something. But he has some great wisdom and some perspectives. He talks about his journey in faith, and we talk about his journey into Bible college and then deconstructing from Bible college, mystical experiences, his experimentation with psychedelic mushrooms. We talk about his book. Eventually we get there. And I think you're just going to really enjoy this conversation. It was fun, and it's just packed full of good wisdom, and I think you're going to like it. So without further ado, here is Kevin Sweeney. Well, welcome listeners to another episode of the Liminal Living Podcast. And today I'm really excited because we have a special guest joining us today, and one of my friends that I have just recently met through a mutual working relationship with a retreat center in Puerto Rico called Caneo. Today we have author, entrepreneur, pastor, church planter, podcast host, spiritual director, leader, Kevin Sweeney. Kevin, welcome to the podcast today.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. That was the first intro I've gotten since I first announced that I'm actually taking people on for spiritual direction. So you're the first one who gets to intro me like that. That was cool.
I took note. Like you said on your Facebook page, hey, I got a big announcement tomorrow. I was like, I want to know what it is. I almost messaged you and be like, let me in, man. I want to know what's happening. But I waited patiently.
Yeah, no, I appreciate being here. And one, since doing quite a bit of podcasts the past probably a little bit over a year for both books, I tell people this: I don't take for granted being invited onto people's podcasts, being invited into people's spaces with the host, with you, and also with the listeners as well. I think it's a special thing, and it's cool to be able to connect with people in a mysterious way. You don't know who they are, where they're listening geographically, where they're listening from, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. I mean, that's a big thing about listening, is where we're listening from in our interior space. And also for people listening in our working relationship, I do just want to say there was a dynamic where Tom was, the head guy and I was like the apprentice. So I'm back with my head coach, my guy. The apprentice is back here. You're still leading the conversation like you did. And for people listening, Tom's someone I have so much respect for and had such a great working relationship with. And, felt so much ease and trust with the way you led. So I'm grateful to be back here.
Yeah, we did a Kaneo cohort of weary and wounded pastors. We had like 5 of them, and we took them through 6 months. So you were with us every other week because you were on another group as well. And every time you'd hop on, like you would just start talking, and the guys would lean in and be like, "Man, who is this guy from Hawaii? Like, he's got so much wisdom."
He just pops in, goes on a rant, and then goes back to serve. Who is this guy?
Yeah. Now, you recently published a book called The Joy of Letting Go, How One Thing Has the Power to Change Everything. And I think, we could use that to just kind of guide our conversation today, dive into some of the content of your book, delve into some of the liminal spaces that speaks into. But before we get into there, give us a little bit of a picture of who you are and where you come from. What are your faith roots? Like, how did you get into this space called Christianity?
Yeah, it's a great question. My story is unique, and I think some of my experience is actually reversed and the opposite of what a lot of people go through in their life. And I'll explain what I mean. But I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and I went to a Catholic school first, second, and third grade. And I left that experience in fourth grade. I went to public school. So I left and I stopped going to mass soon after. At some point it wasn't like an 11-year-old ideological, like the Pope ex cathedra. How dare they? This is not possible.
Yeah.
It was just me being young, like being bored and not wanting to go. And I sort of, left, meaning I just stopped participating, but I stopped engaging. And my felt experience of the Catholic Church, of God, of Jesus, was what I call now a pleasant indifference. That's what I left with. Just, okay, I don't know what that was exactly. I don't have any strong, abstract beliefs about the atonement. I didn't pick that up, I don't think, or ideas about, metaphysics or anything like that. And also, and I'm really grateful for this, my parents did not push me, coerce me, or shame me to keep going to mass or to be engaged in the church. And I think that was really important for me looking back. It wasn't a felt thing at the time, but just having the freedom to not engage, I think helped create this fertile soil and open space within me to just be myself and explore my own life and in this world. So I'm actually really, really grateful for that. And it's funny, going to LA Unified School District, fourth grade, I leave Catholic school my first day, and I'm like, man, kids are cussing, and then soon after, kids are fighting in school. And for me, at 9 or 10 years old, I was like, this is salvation. This is it for me. This is where I belong. Public school, it's just chaos, and you can get away with a lot more. And that's kind of where it began. That's an important thing, because we live in a culture now where, church hurt, religious trauma, spiritual abuse, these are all on a broader level, relatively new ideas and concepts for people. They've been there in their substance and reality, but being discussed in a social setting, and now in a way that's like it's consistently talked about in the worlds that we navigate. So I don't have those experiences, and I hopefully have compassion and empathy and understanding for people who do. Those are massive things, but that wasn't my story. I didn't have this strong oppositional energy to the church. I didn't have a defiant thing against God. Like, I didn't grow up with guilt and shame because God was mad at me. I don't think I ever thought about that once. I just did whatever the hell I wanted, and those things now, that created its own pathologies in my life, but I didn't have the same religious cultural baggage to work through, transcend, and overcome once I entered in. And that's important. That's a really big part of my story. So where it goes from there, the quick thing after that is I have this massive existential crisis at 17.
At 17?
And I had at 17.
Okay.
And So I would say the quick thing is I had this massive existential crisis at 17. I had, was taking mushrooms, which would, psychedelic mushrooms like psilocybin, which will become like a spiritual guide for me when I didn't have any. And then I have this spontaneous, immediate awakening moment with God when I was 18 years old that completely reoriented my life, and I would say rewired my consciousness, and probably started to rewire my brain around the same time as well as I started to grow. So really fascinating, really unique journey that I'm more than happy to talk about in detail. My crisis was just your classic, what happens when you have everything and it feels like nothing. Meaning, when I was young, I had a lot of attention and I'm playing sports and I'm supposed to play in college and I'm getting high and I'm selling weed and I just have that whole life around me. Where I was at 17, like I have everything that I'm supposed to have in my world, in the world of sports and hip hop and who I look up to and in basketball, music. I was like, I'm doing it. Like, and I know that. And yet I can't escape this inner restlessness in my soul. Augustine, the heart is restless until it rests in you, which I believe comes from Psalm 61. Like that was my story. And I had my journey with mushrooms as a guide for me at that time began with a real radical third person self-awareness, where I had the ability to be outside of living my life and watching myself live my life, and not only asking what am I doing, but asking why am I doing what I'm doing. And that just continued to lead you to all these profound, unsettling, disturbing questions. So okay, I have everything and it feels like nothing. Now I'm asking bigger questions. What is real? What are we all doing here? Where are we going? So
now,
as I'm scoring 30 points in ice,
like you're 17 years old and going
like 16, 17, and 18.
This is right in there. I didn't even know that the word existential existed when I was a 17-year-old.
I didn't know that word at that time either. I wouldn't have used that word, but that felt deep, standing before the universe, that you feel in existentialism, like whether it's the one-to-one standing before God or death or universe, depending on which existential philosopher you're reading. That felt like, what the hell is this? What am I?
What triggered that realization for you at 17? Was it, you're taking mushrooms, the psilocybin gets you in different states of consciousness, and just being in that different state of consciousness started these questions? Or was it before that? Like what triggered?
I think the seeds of it were before. Like I was always weird. Super weird, like in my head. You wouldn't know it, but I was like I thought about weird stuff. Like I can remember, I'll tell you a funny story. I was like sitting in my parents' bed, like one depressing Sunday afternoon where you have to go back to school the next day. I'm like, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, I'm really not sure. And I remember sitting in the bed thinking, there's a kid on the other side of the world basically doing this same thing as me, but in a different culture, in a different place. And I'm like, and to that kid doing that, in my head, I just want to say hi. Because it's like maybe there's a kid over there thinking the same thing about where I am, and we have this weird connection because we're actually more similar than we think. Like I was just weird like that, you know? The radical self-awareness, the ability to look at yourself from a virtually, objective, I say that because nothing's 100% objective. And then to take that, my life began as the interior journey. Like when you go so deep into yourself, you discover God. That was my story, So that's where, when I talk about mushrooms as I have a chapter in my first book called Mushrooms as Missionaries. And it's essentially how mushrooms functioned as a missionary for me. A missionary in its best form is someone who's pointing someone else further towards the reality of Christ. Now, obviously, we know the word missionary missions is all caught up in a colonial, violent project, an empire, and white supremacy and Eurocentricity. And we need to keep dismantling that. I do my own version of that. I hope we all do.
Yeah.
But in a healthy form, it's like, okay, that's a humble role. You point someone beyond themselves towards God. That's a good thing. And if that's the case, mushrooms were that for me. And with the question you ask, I remember the first time I ever ate mushrooms, I was at a party and I walked over to talk to somebody, and I was like outside of myself, watching myself walk over to talk to people. And I think that that's the first thing I can remember, a real radical, unsettling feeling
Mm-hmm.
of that kind of a radical third person self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's moments like that, but it's just me as well. And what am I doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Oh, so you're telling me my whole drive of playing basketball at the high level that I'm at is actually to get people to see me. What does it mean to be seen? It means to be affirmed. What is affirmation about? Affirmation is about value. Oh, so everything I'm doing is looking to other people to tell me I have value. So my whole sense of self is contingent upon whether or not other people are praising me. That is a fragile way to be a human, and that is not freedom. That's what was driving me at that age, was those unsettling realizations of everything I've ever done has been driven by the need for praise and approval and affirmation. That's not what freedom is.
So here you are, 17-year-old at a party, and you're watching yourself objectively walk over, and you have this realization, like, everything that I'm driving for is driven by this ego of I need other people to tell me that I'm worth something, that I'm having value. And like other 17-year-olds don't think about this, like, or at least the average ones that I know don't. I didn't as a 17-year-old. You have this weird inner revelation, and was this like the result of being on a different state of mind that the mushrooms put you in, do you think, and then tied that with your personality?
I think it was everything, I shared before about just being weird and the seeds of it. The mushrooms, it's like having a guide. They played a guiding role, but my sustained commitment to the Socratic self-examining was my own journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some people just, like I tell a story in my book about this happens a lot, peak experiences, whether it comes from psychedelics or like Christians going to a camp and coming back, it's everything's perfect. And then, oh man, we got to go back to life and we forget the insights.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story about a kid with his friends where the kid did acid, LSD the night before. And he waked in the next morning, the friends are all sharing stories about their experience. And the one friend's like, dude, last night I discovered the meaning of life. Which people feel like when you do stuff like that. Yeah. And the kids are like, dude, well, what is it? And the first kid's like, I forgot. And so it's like you have these peak experiences, which are very real, whether they're psychedelics or just any kind of awakening moment without them. Mm-hmm. But then you forget and you don't pay attention. But I kept that going. I kept thinking, I kept reflecting, I kept the journey of examination going. And it was symbiotic. I was doing mushrooms multiple times at that age, but I also just continued my own journey, sustained that self-awareness, that self-interrogation, and that all together sort of created the atmosphere for eventually me just being like, what is this? Yeah. What am I going to do? And it's funny to think, but even at 17 or 18, I was consciously like, I want to find what's real. Mm-hmm. That's why even the religious journey wasn't about being right. It was about being real. Like, what is good? What is real? What is true? I don't need it to show up as Jesus. I don't need truth to show up in any particular way. I just want to know what's true and what's real. It wasn't primarily like a cognitive what's right. It was bigger than that, And I remember thinking, like, I'm on a spiritual quest, and no one knew this. I didn't tell anybody. I just knew what I was doing. I was like, I want to know. And I remember having experiences because I was also getting into some darker places just personally, because when you are like, everything I ever thought I cared about doesn't matter, that's hard, when you're young. And what is real then? Well, I'm so over getting high. I'm so over the same old thing, but is there anything better? And I'm pretty sure, and I remember having this deep thing of, I'm going to search for truth and what's real, and if I find it, I'll give my life to it. And if there's nothing out there and this is all trivial and arbitrary and meaningless, I'm gonna kill myself. Like, I ain't gonna, what am I gonna do? Just suffer for no damn reason? That doesn't seem good to me. And then, that's a whole nother story that you can read more about in the first book, but I have this profound awakening moment at 18 while I was on mushrooms, where I was just like, I just experienced God. You know, that was the warmth of a mother, the embrace of a father, the companionship of a sibling, the familial, warm, welcoming. Like, for me, God from the beginning was pure affirmation of my life. It's what it was, pure grace and love, and a set of eyes that are fixed upon you, being like, you're good. That was my beginning point. So it's funny with the move towards the mystical for people later. Most people begin with a belief system.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, they make a distinction, hopefully, between the belief system and the actual living reality of God or Christ. And they try to put those together. I don't believe this, but do I experience this? Mine began with experience. And I got the beliefs after, which is a whole different way of doing this.
Now I see what you say. Like, I did mine backwards.
Yeah, it's like I had never heard of the atonement, like really where I consciously thought about it. I didn't have a systematic belief system. No one in youth group told me what to think about Jesus. I just had this direct experience, which is what defines the mystical for many, a direct experience of the sacred. So it was like the foundation was love, experience, and grace. And then eventually they started to build on their beliefs. And it didn't take me too long to be like, let's not take this all too seriously, because that's not what this is all about. You know,
you had that foundational experiential to kind of keep you grounded. Whereas the reverse, where somebody starts off religious and they are jammed a bunch of information in their heads, and usually like deconstruction for white men happens over ideas. I learned this from Rohadi from last week, and he says, we don't use deconstruction in places of color because we're decolonizing, which is different. And that really sparked something for me. Like, so for deconstruction for white men usually happens over ideas. I don't agree with a 6-day creation. I don't agree with the evolution was false, or they start with ideas, and then people of marginalized people, then they have they have abuse and harm done to them, and that causes a deconstruction or decolonization process where they start rethinking the power structures around them. And like you're just coming in with the experience, whereas some of the people who have the kind of the structure in place already, they're like, wait a second, this structure doesn't match my lived experience. And that's what suffering does. Like, suffering brings us out of our heads and puts our feet back on the ground and says, wait a second, you got all these belief systems and doctrinal statements, 8 pages long or whatnot. And like, but here you just lost a child. What are you going to do about that? How does your theology now make sense? And so people then, in order to maintain the system of belief, they start to like cliche the moment. Well, God's in control. God can't give me more than I can handle. God must trust me a whole lot. And then they just start like spiritual bypassing the actual moment and reality that this is. Were there times when that belief system then didn't match the lived experience and you're like, wait, hold up, that one, I've experienced something else?
Yeah, that's funny. So that happened when I was 18, and then 6 months later or whatever, I moved to Hawaii. So I walked away from everything. Like, no more basketball, no more music, no more everything I was doing. I'm gonna try to get sober. Everything in my life is responding to that which I just experienced, because it's the only real thing I ever knew. Like, and I would have said I just encountered God, and I still say that. And my girlfriend at the time was in Hawaii, who's now my wife. So I moved out there and started over. And eventually, 2 or 3, maybe 3, I felt called to be a pastor. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what they do.
Do they have those in Hawaii?
I was just like, soon after, within a couple of years, I had this sense of God's calling me to be a pastor. And that's just a part of my natural desire to be a guide for other people's awakening, and that's always been with me, there's a journey, and I want to keep going on this journey, and I want to help others along the way. that was true when I was a kid. I always looked out for people. You know, it was like, back then it was like, oh, I have these young kids 2 years younger than me. I'm like, they're hanging out, like, all right, I'm taking them to some parties. I'll do this. I'm gonna teach them how to sell weed or like stuff like that. Cause that's what I knew at the time, but that was still my heart, was to look out for people. And eventually after that, I ended up at a Foursquare Bible College.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Foursquare, you know, it's a Pentecostal denomination. Amy Semple McPherson, 1926, Angelus Temple, East Los Angeles, right? The whole thing.
Yeah.
And when I went there, think like that was my first time really consistently, like for the most part, around like that many Christians. And it was at a Bible college. So Bible college, and it's like very small, you know, it feels like most kids are very church, you know, a lot of pastors, missionaries, kids, probably in the Foursquare thing for a long time. And at the beginning, I loved it because I was so thirsty for knowledge and for understanding that, like, I get the classic fundamentalist evangelical theological education, you know, like historical grammatical interpretation for the Bible, and here's this, and here's a systematic theology. So I got that real, like, I think about my time at Bible college, like the Dalai Lama quote, like, you have to learn the rules to know how to like creatively break them.
Yeah.
That's what Bible college did for me in a really, really great way. Like, they gave me the conceptual foundation to give me a lot of order, a lot small, like, this is what it is. And that didn't last very long for me, but it was so helpful for me as a theological starting point. And so I was real into it and like studying apologetics, you know, and like, wow, this is amazing. These guys are brilliant. I'm doing, because I love the life of the mind. So I was into it. And I think at the end of my second year there, right at the end of the year, and I wasn't like, you know, reading too broadly. I was just being introduced to any of this. You know, I didn't know the depth or the breadth of the theological tradition at all. But then 2 years after I was there, right when my school year was ending before the summer, a kid said to me, he's like, hey, if I were you, I'd be really careful how you talk here. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, if you keep talking the way you do, people are going to think you're emergent.
Oh, yeah.
Because the emerging church and the
emergent movement
conversation was a big controversial thing at the time, which, to zoom out for a sec, what is happening at a more broader and collective level right now when people talk about deconstruction is the same movement of stages of faith that was happening in the emergent church 15, 20 years ago. It was just happening on the fringes. Now it's happening at the collective. Because the way I see deconstruction, the way most people use that term now in evangelical-ish spaces, is it's a movement from one stage of faith to another. In Fowler's, it's stage 3 to 4. In Spiral Dynamics, it's blue to orange and green. It's actually deconstruction, this massive traumatic moment, which it really is when it happens. It's actually just a movement from one stage of faith to another. And if you keep going, it'll happen 3, 4, 5 more times, depending, you know? But the first one is the hardest because it's the first time you're examining your own set of beliefs. That's why it's so hard and painful and confusing. My first questioning, examining of the system was that summer. This kid says, you know, you might be emergent. I'm like, what the hell? I don't even know what that is. I said, I better find it out. And so that summer was the summer I realized I can read like nonstop. And I never knew that because I didn't read growing up. I just, you know, I didn't read. And I read Tony Jones' book, The New Christians, which is funny because you remind me of him the way you look right now. I read his book, The New Christians, and that sent me on just chasing the footnotes. Now I'm reading Brian McLaren. Now I'm reading Doug Padgett. Now I'm reading the whole summer. I just devoured everything emergent. And then you start reading, well, who are the theologians they're reading? Oh, N.T. Wright. Walter Brueggemann. Who are they reading? And I'm doing now, Peter Rollins, you know, Caputo, all these people, right? And that was my first massive, that the stage of deconstruction people talk about was that summer and that next journey in my life, a massive transformation of how I see faith and Christianity. It was my first breaking of the system I was handed and seeing this goes much wider and further than the school is teaching me. And those moments are very, very, very exhilarating and liberating and empowering and also very scary.
Yeah.
because your ego, it's like you intuit, if I really go here, it will put me at odds with people I care about. If I really let myself go here, I might not be able to I'll never be invited back to this school to ever say anything. The very people who gave me the foundation. And that's a scary thing. But I always have trusted the process of the Spirit will keep leading us to more life.
Mm-hmm.
Like this in the Bible, in the Gospel of John, the Spirit will lead you into all truth. I really trust that and feel comfortable with that. So I'm like, if it's real and if it's good, no matter what consequences I have, it's making me more me and it's making me more alive. And I trust that. So that was my first thing. And then when I went to grad school a couple of years later at Fuller, my focus was on like Black and womanist theology. So now it's not just like you said for, privileged white males, which is idea based, which it very much was. But then soon after, it's like, oh yeah, it's philosophical and theological, but it's also now we're talking about justice, liberation, whiteness, power dynamics, societal critiques, etc. So for me, from 24 to 27 was just a massive, or 20 or whatever age I was, upheaval of like reorientation, transformation of how I see, transformation of my spiritual intelligence. And yeah, it was a once that summer started, the summer of Emergent, I was like, I just kept on going to places people couldn't even imagine.
I love that, the summer of Emergent. Now, what, like, you kind of did an idea jump, and I want you to build a bridge for me. You went from Foursquare Bible, Emergent, Summer of Emergence, to getting master's degree with a focus on womanist liberation theology. Like what?
Yeah, Black Womanist
Theology. What was the bridge that got you there? Was it a thought you ran into, an author you ran into, or?
I think, that's a big difference between like the Emergent books 15, 20 years ago and now is like, now it's not just deconstructing how we see philosophically or theologically, saying like, oh, we all have a system of belief. You've been handed that. Let's examine that. Now you're reflecting on the views you've been given. You have a lens that's very disorienting. It is all that. But now is much more socially conscious, much more aware of institutionalized white supremacy, systemic racism, power dynamics, empire, colonization, post-colonial stuff, etc. So that's now is like filling that in much further. I think, again, in a literary level right now, what people see. But what I took an intro to Black theology class right when I went to Fuller, and I took an intro to Black theology class, and the professor, Dr. Ralph C. Watkins, who's now at Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta, dude, he just blew my mind. I'm like, I could listen to this dude talk for 3 hours straight. He was spellbinding. And it was, I think what I was doing in terms of ideas in the mind of like so much of postmodernism is like perspectivalism, like everybody sees from a perspective. There is no objective and neutral interpretive space. That's a big deal. It's a big thing that rattles people. But once you start to really see that and embrace it, it creates to use those technical terms, an epistemic humility. It creates I'm open to see from other people's perspectives. It creates you're limited based on your social location. All that stuff primed me, opened up space, created this wide open like kind of canvas within me. So when I first came across liberation theology through Black theology, I was like, this is it. I was just primed for it. I was so ready to just take it all in. And once I did, I was like, this is all I want to know about now. Black theology, womanist theology, which for people who don't know is theology being done out of the experience of Black women. And then you start to do your other work around stuff if you want to. But that was like, when I was at Fuller, I was going to do a PhD in stuff surrounding this and institutionalized white supremacy and evangelical spaces and basically white theology. And that's what I was doing over there. I was like, I'm going to be that guy. And that ended up falling through, which led to the church. But yeah, that experience with Dr. Watkins, who I still stay in touch with, like he was going to be my PhD advisor. And it was such a great experience over there, largely because we were just doing direct studies and just hanging out and involved with like, the Black theology department, African American church studies department there. So Yeah, that was a whole nother integral part of my life right there.
And what year was that when that was all happening?
Shoot, that was, let's see, 2009 to 2012 when I graduated.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah.
You're kind of leading the curve on that one then, because this stuff started to really cascade into mainstream, right around George Floyd. It was trying to get into that mainstream space I remember as a teenager, the Rodney King beating. Like, it's been trying to get into the mainstream, this stuff, and it feels like it finally hit that tipping point with George Floyd and his murder. And that's when it came into collective consciousness, and then the white fragility took over and was just like, no, we are going to resist, this movement. And here you are in 2009, you're like reading all this stuff and eating it up.
Well, that's where, like, I've joked around with people on podcasts or people I talk to. It's like, when you know a band, like, way before, and it's like, or like, there's like a joke of like when someone spills a drink, you're like, I remember my first beer. It's like just a joke you say. It's like, 2020, George Floyd, the uprising, all of a sudden the year of 2020 was systemic racism. People weren't going further to say, well, actually, the primary way systemic racism works in our country is actually called institutionalized white supremacy. People weren't going that far, but it was a good step. And I would joke around and be like, I remember talking about this too, like 11 years ago or 10 years ago, when it was first, like, you're learning about systems of mass incarceration, webs of injustice, like learning about how VA loans, the suburbs were created by white flight and basically off limit to black, except everything, But also someone could say to me, be like, and black folks have been talking about this forever, and black folks have been experiencing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that don't mean nothing that I know that at that point. I would just joke around about that. And I think with all of from Bible college and my conservative, reading apologetics, and then going to the Emergent, then studying, Black and Womanist and Liberation Theology, and then a transitioning, and all of the mystics along the way as well, and probably the biggest influence for me the past, I don't know, almost 10 years, 8 years now, I don't even know exactly, is like Ken Wilber and integral theory. And to go into that and how that shaped me in such profound ways I couldn't even begin to, go into. The whole thing for me is I just allow myself the freedom to go wherever the gravity of life and the spirit is drawing me forward. Like the way I think about when people change in stages of consciousness and change how they see the world, like when we talk about deconstruction, changing ideas, is like you're going up a spiraling mountain and you go up and you stop. It's like every 2 years you get up and you leave again and you spiral around the mountain. So you're going around and you're going higher. And every time you stop for a little bit, like when you learn new things, you see differently. You're looking at a different, vista. You're looking at a different horizon. 100 feet below that, it looked like that was a tree. Actually, that one tree was connected with the whole forest. You didn't know that before, but you know it now. That's how I see growth. And I think sometimes people will do that once or twice, go through paradigm shifts, and eventually they stop. And they keep reading more, but it's within the same stage of consciousness and frame of reference they've been in. So they'll grow a little bit, then they hit 30 or 40, and they stop and they stay there for the rest of their lives. And I say, oh no, what you look at as a permanent settlement was actually a temporary place to stay. We're supposed to keep going. What are we doing here? The people that were leading me, guiding me, challenging me, critiquing me in 2008, like an N.T. Wright, when you first read N.T. Wright, and it's like mind-blowing. It's like, no, he's still legit. He's a great thinker, but that's not the voice he had for me in 2008 is not the voice that's calling me forward in my own stage, in my own evolutionary path in 2023, And I'm integrating everything he's taught me, which is great, but I'm going to continue to keep going. And I think that's for my path and the dark nights of the soul and growing, and why it's hard and feels clunky at times is, one, we have to give ourselves the permission to just keep growing and to allow the chips of thinking and life to fall wherever they may. Like, my faith is in God, not in my understanding of God. My faith is that God keeps calling me forward and loving me and making me more whole, no matter what I think.
Yeah.
So I'm not scared to let go of beliefs about God, because for the mystic, our faith is not defined by beliefs we hold about God. It's the trust that we're being held together by God. That's a totally different, it's not knowing, it's being known. The highest level of knowing is not knowing, it's being known. It's communion. It's not just information. And so I can change my beliefs. That changes nothing about the love and grace that is with me constantly as the centering reality, lived reality, felt reality every single day. So that's why I have such different influences, because at different points, those were the voices I needed to be solidified where I was, to challenge where I was, to call me forward, and then to keep going. And that just keeps on happening over and over and over again.
And those, I used to listen to voices, and then you move on from those voices, and then you look back at those voices, and then, like I used to, I'm like totally ashamed to say this, but I'm going to confess, I used to love Mark Driscoll back when I was a youth pastor in 2007, 6 and 7 and 8. He was just edgy, and he was a good speaker. He was successful. He's on the internet. He drew me in, and really he shaped how I did ministry in that time. And now, you listen to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, he was like teaching me like an abusive form of leadership. And then you got to, I think I still like have some of the gifts from that experience of life. Not that Mark Driscoll was a gift, but like the way that I was doing ministry was, to me at that time, it was life-giving. It was helpful to people. Was I perfect? Absolutely not. And I've learned a ton since then. And now, like, nothing from Mark Driscoll is of value to me at all. He needs to stop preaching and stop being a pastor and go to therapy. So there's some voices that you hold to for a while. They speak to you, they inform you, and they kind of transform you in that season. And then you got to look back on them and be like, no, that was not a good voice to listen to, But then there's these ones, like I've loved Thomas Merton forever. For years, I always go back to Merton, and I always pick up something new. So it seems like there's like these voices that I hold to at earlier stages, and I let them go and be like, that was dumb. I did something good with it, the best I could with it, but that was dumb. I need to let that go. But then there's these consistent voices, and like they speak to you at different points of your journey. And then like you're coming around that mountain and you have a higher perspective. Now you can see like a different perspective of their writing.
Totally.
And Thomas Merton is that for me. He's, he's always been one that's guided me through difficult times and dark nights and deconstructions. I've been through a lot now since 2005. We lost our second son shortly after birth. We've been raising our first son. It's a lot of disability, and caretaking is really hard. We've been through a lot of traumatic things, and like Thomas Merton has been one that's carried me through the whole time. Like, I don't know who I can listen to, but I know I can trust Merton right now.
I love it.
Do you have any voices like that have just been consistent? Like I've always loved, fill in the blank.
Yeah. What I think? I think one, it's just powerful and beautiful to hear that, how the voice, that's one of my professors in Fuller, who was, Presbyterian and became Anglican. And his name is Dennis Ockham, Dr. Dennis Ockham. And one of the gifts he gave me was seeing and appreciating the great tradition of the faith, capital G, capital T, of the historical, diverse, global body of Christ. Learning about the role of the creeds. And I do have my critique of the creeds, but like the historical role they played and why they're important. And, Stanley Hauerwas talks about to be a Christian is to jump on a moving train. This idea of we're a part of this grand tradition is, to me, very powerful and very beautiful and very grounding. So to hear that from you, it kind of moved me. I just think that's amazing, what you're saying. And also what I would say about Merton in light of the spiraling up a mountain metaphor is some voices are totally locked in at a particular place on the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And they resonate with you so deeply because that's where you are at the time, or you're about to get to. So they're the defining voice.
Yeah.
They are like, we are here. And you're like, everything about this is making sense to me and resonating so deeply. That's why some people speak to us, and and that's why we move beyond them, but we still carry them with us, you know? Now, the wisdom of somebody like a Merton is so high up the mountain that you come across him when you're like a third of the way up, and you're like, this guy's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Because he has enough wisdom to speak to everybody. And also we hear from where we are. So you experience him like this, but 3 to 5 years later, when you go further up the mountain, you return to him and you're like, this is deeper and more beautiful and more profound than I thought. Yeah. Because we have more of ability to see and connect with the depths and dimensions of it. So that's kind of why I think some voices, they feel more timeless because they actually are further ahead. Doesn't make them better and more valuable. They just have grown more. And they see more. I would say for me, the one voice that stayed with me the longest is definitely Richard Rohr.
I love
without
Richard
a doubt.
Rohr. He's
I started. I mean, to me, he was the carrier of the work of Merton. You know, in the most public way, since Merton really reintroduced the contemplative to the Western Christian tradition and so powerfully. Mm-hmm. And Rohr has stayed with me, and I think that's why, because Rohr was so much further ahead. I mean, to me, Rohr is like at the leading edge of consciousness for Christians in the West, and maybe for people. Yeah. And he's speaking from so high up on the mountain, so to speak, you know, to continue that metaphor, that like it keeps resonating. You keep seeing more. And then definitely for the past, like I said, decade, Wilbur, I'm like, I mean, think of, you know, in seasons of your life, you have a voice that speaks to you so profoundly. Mm-hmm. You know, like Driscoll in 2007, or this person in 2012, or this theologian. And the way we quote the voices that are speaking to us the most, because we just quote them because we read them all the time. You know, of course we're going to do that. Rohr has been quoting Wilbur like that for like 20-ish years.
Oh, really?
Think about that. For Rohr, Wilbur is, from my perspective, what I see for Rohr, Wilbur's that guy. Mm-hmm. Like, think about what Ken Wilber has to be that person for Rohr. Like, I can think about an old contemplative prayer. This is like when you used to buy MP3s off of like Rohr's website.
Oh yeah.
This old contemplative prayer I used to listen to, like, is like a talk on true self, false self. It's on YouTube as well. I mean, I want to say it's from 2000 and I listened to it in 2008. I don't know when it was recorded. But I'm like, Rohr is reading out of one of Wilbur's books, verbatim. He's reading a passage in that talk, you know? And you can look at Rohr, and when he says stuff, if you know Wilbur, you're like, that's Wilbur. Mm-hmm. That's Wilbur. Like, that's Wilbur. Not because he's in that same tradition, you know? And Rohr obviously sees him in some ways as a guide or an informing voice. So Rohr consistently, Wilbur now probably been the most consistent. And then when I look at stages and times, that season of studying Black and Womanist theology, Kelly Brown Douglas, womanist theologian, I think she's the dean of Union Theological Seminary right now in New York City. Dude, she wrote a book called What's Faith Got to Do with It? She wrote a book called The Black Christ. That is like one of my favorite books ever. It's a short book. Mm-hmm. And her work in that, at that time for me, was some of the most provocative and powerful and amazing things. Like her critiques of the creeds at that moment have still stayed with me to this day. Mm. I'm literally like writing about them right now, you know, however many years later. Like, she's awesome. So yeah, that's what I love, is the voice. That's what I learned from my professor at Fuller and from the Black spiritual tradition, is there's such a reverence and an honor for the ancestors, the people who have come before us, the voices who have shaped us to continue to speak through us. Mm-hmm. You know, when you hear me, you hear Doc Watkins. When you hear me, you hear Kelly Brown Douglas. When you hear me, you hear James Cone, and you hear all these voices. And then you hear Rohr, you hear all these people because they're in us. You know, that great tradition is they're all flowing through us and in us. And I've definitely, from the Black spiritual tradition, that's one thing I've gained an appreciation for, is how the voices continue to they're alive in us as we continue to do our work and share. And I love that.
Yeah, I do a lot of funerals for our community here. I've adopted the parish mentality where if there's a spiritual need in the community, I don't care if you come to my church, I am there to help you.
I like that.
And so I think I've done about 21 funerals this year so far. And that's one of the things I share quite a bit was that, when you love somebody and you care for somebody, like you're not doing it with just your love, but you're doing it with the love that this loved one gave you, because love can't be destroyed. And it's a thing that you have and possess and exchange and give away. It's tangible. And so when you're loving someone else, somebody taught you how to love them. And you're not just doing it with your love, but with their love. Well, and this is how love endures beyond death. This is how love is indestructible, is because it lives on in the hearts of those who received it. And I say this is not a cliche. This is as tangible as the $20 bill in your pocket. Except when you give away that $20 bill, you don't have it anymore. But if you give away the love that you have, you didn't lose it, you just multiplied it. And I'm trying to get people to see, like, this is not a cliche. This is real. This is how their love is extending beyond death. And these voices that are in our life when we read, these people, and then we go and teach someone, it's how the people that we looked up to, the people that loved us and taught us, then extend beyond their years. Thomas Merton's been gone since I think 1969. He's been gone for a long time, but all of these people now are carrying his teaching throughout everywhere. And so when I teach on something, it's like Merton's thoughts and love for this world are now coming through me. And that's something I'm just connecting those two dots of, the thoughts, the love that our loved ones give us, we love with other people. And then the thoughts that other people have shaped us with, they're continuing on shaping the world with their thoughts by shaping our minds. And then we go out and teach someone else about something. And I just connected those two things in my brain.
No, it's powerful.
Now you wrote a book and you released it called The Joy of Letting Go. And why did you write this book? Like, what was it in you that's just like, boy, if the world knew this, it would solve X amount of things or whatever? Like, what was the pressing need on your, like, I have to write a book and this is the topic and here I go. And now it's in the world. Like, what brought birth to this book?
Yeah, I think it comes, the book's called The Joy of Letting Go, how one thing has the power to change everything. And in the book, I say, here's where I begin. Virtually every time we are angry, feel stuck, and are struggling to move forward. Of course, after all the rage, blame, name-calling, threats, pity parties, and explosive outrage at God or people around us and life itself subsides, right? We have to let that subside. It could be a part of it. Eventually, there's probably just something we need to let go of. And also something we need to accept, because those two are directly connected. I say we fight, we resist, we desperately try to believe it's a million other easier things. Maybe I need to work harder, just move faster, better strategy, or whatever it is. But we wish it was so many other things than the one thing it usually ends up being, which is we need to do some letting go. And that sucks because it's painful.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we'd rather just get angrier at injustice and rage against the machine harder for some of us. We'd rather just show up at the next event and sing louder and cry harder, right? That's easier for us. We'd rather read another book about letting go and try to figure out in our minds, for some of us who can use that as a defense mechanism. And eventually there's a lot of times when we feel that stuckness and all these other anger experiences of feeling like we can't move forward, and we're like, there's a gridlock with where we're at. I'm like, there's probably something really painful we have to accept about our life and about life itself, which means there's something we need to let go of. And yet, when I say all that, I'm like, no matter how much it sucks or how painful it is, what we always discover on the other side of letting go is a new beginning. Every time you let go, you begin again. And every time you begin again, a part of you is born again. So for me, that book from 10 years of pastoral ministry, and I'm sure other parts of my life, is me listening to people, right? Doing spiritual direction. If you do that, being pastorally, like listening to people, being present with people that long, however we all do that. I would sit with people long enough, and in the midst of all the complexity of everything they're sharing, I would eventually just see something of, oh, there's just something really tough they have to accept right now, which means they have to do some letting go. You know what they have to accept? They thought after working that hard for 3 years, their thing, church, company, brand would be farther than it is, and it's not. That's tough. It's tough to accept that. You thought you'd be here. You thought at 32 you'd be here by now, but you're not. You want to be mad, you want to blame people. Okay, but eventually, you know what? You have to accept that. You're not where you thought you would be. That's a hard thing to accept when you've worked hard and experienced suffering and disappointment. So in order to accept it, what do you have to let go of? All the expectations other people or you had on yourself to be further than where you are. The notion that you're supposed to be here by this age, whatever it is, you have to let go of that. Let go of the way you thought it was supposed to be. Accept what it is. And through that painful grief of acceptance opens up space for resurrection and new life every single time, everywhere. To me, I'm like, that's why I say in the book, letting go is not one thing we do. Letting go is that which maintains the flow of everything we do.
Oh, that's good stuff right there. Can you say that again?
Because letting go is not one thing we do. Letting go is that which maintains the flow of everything we do.
That's really profound.
Because letting go is not just another thing. No, letting go is it's a constant invitation beneath everything in our life that we have to consistently embrace and do in order to maintain the flow of our pastoring, of us being good partners in a relationship, of us being present parents, of us being friends, of us being creatives, whatever it is. There's, in all these sticking points, so often there's an invitation. Oh, I'm frustrated because I thought when I put this out, people would have responded more and they kind of were more indifferent. That hurts me. Oh, it didn't go the way I thought. Let me accept that. Let me let go of the expectations I had. Hey, guess what? Now that I've done that, I'm back. Let's keep creating. Those were just my expectations. I was disappointed because I had uncommunicated, unconscious expectations. That's it. If I can let go of those, now I'm back. If I get stuck there, now I'm pissed, resentful, angry at people, jealous at people, struggling with comparison, mad at myself. No, we do the work of letting go, which is very painful. But once you do it, now there's more life ahead. So that's why the book is structured of like every chapter is a different thing, like being present, compassion, beginning again. I don't know. I forget like acceptance. And what I'm saying is letting go is required to do every one of these things well and to maintain your joy along the way. If you don't know how to really let go, pastoring will eat you alive. Like think about that from our experience. If you don't know how to practice acceptance, forgiveness, and letting go, pastoring will break you.
Yeah.
So will every other really hard thing in life where you'll be confronted with a lot of your own illusions. But if you do the work of letting go, there's a way forward through all of this. And that's what I want to invite people into through the book.
Some people will embrace the vocabulary of what you're saying, but then they will practice something entirely different, like dismissal or suppression or bypassing.
That's good.
They'll accept your vocabulary, but then they'll do something else with it. And as pastors, that's like our number one challenge, is to be very clear about what we're saying and how you go about accomplishing this and what we're not saying. And some people are going to hear you all day long and be like, yes, amen, I love that, and then go about their spiritual bypassing of their hard life or their suppression of their negative emotions about something. How would you see the nuance between like those two polarity, like letting go versus suppression or those things? How are you going to help someone?
No, see, this is the insight I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast. Tom's ability to see the need for distinctions and those subtleties is what displays the wisdom you have to see, which is what I love. Because that is a thing, a massive thing, to be honest. Letting go. First, I'll say something about like what letting go is in a way, then I'll kind of make that distinction. Letting go is a sacred handing over. it feels like a conscious removing of multiple layers of the very clothes that have been covering us for as long as we can remember.
Mm-hmm.
Followed by this naked and exposed presenting of ourselves to the possible presence of a loving God or a benevolent reality, or whatever the hell it is that holds all this together, depending on how you name all that, right? Letting the difference between dismissing and bypassing and actual letting go is, in order to let something go, you first have to take it into yourself.
Mm.
You cannot let go that which you have not held closely.
Okay. Yeah.
I can only let go, like right now, if you were watching, I'm holding my phone in my hand. I can only let go of that which I'm holding on to. Bypassing and dismissing is, I want the fruit and the experience after letting go, so I'm free from it without ever holding it or taking it in the first place. So I want to jump over that, right?
Yeah.
I want to skip over the facing of the truth. I want to skip over the feeling of what it feels like what it feels like to accept something hard about life. Like when you're pastoring, like for the pastors out there and for us doing that, in our journeys, when you have a tough moment where you're like, I thought if I was this faithful, it wouldn't be this hard, or people wouldn't betray me. Like I thought if I loved, this one for pastors, I thought if I loved people well, they wouldn't betray me or leave me like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's an illusion that we carry with us. Now, in a felt, real way, when you're experiencing that in an embodied and concrete way in your own life, and you're having to confront that, and you're being confronted with your illusions and your expectations on how life's supposed to be. If I gave my life like this, I wouldn't have to suffer this much and it wouldn't be this hard pastoring, but it is. That's a hard thing to accept, because if I take that into me and say, oh, this is what I have to accept, life doesn't work the way I thought it was supposed to. I'm taking that into me and feeling it right now. And there's tears, and I'm on the side of a mountain, and I'm cussing, or whatever it is that you do in those moments. And once I feel it and refuse to let go of it, refuse to numb it, deny it, or distract myself from it, when I take it into me and just accept it and exhaust it of all of its power, then and only then can I let it go. People want the fruit of letting go without the process of acceptance, which is very painful. So the bypassing is, oh, I already forgave them. It's like, no. You were singing really hard in worship, and you thought if you just gritted your teeth and cried enough, it was over. No. You tried to jump over the hard part. And that's and our story and the ironic thing about that, even for preachers who I think preach bypassing and preach this type of stuff, like, in the name of Jesus, your anxiety's gone. It's like, that's not how life works. It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. Heartbreak is not that simple. Trauma is not that simple. Grief is not that simple of a pastor laying your hands on you, praying for you without you having to do your own work. That's not how it works, and that's very irresponsible and damaging for clergy to say that, because people believe it and they're vulnerable. And now when it doesn't work like that, maybe they think it's their fault because the pastor told me that's how it works. No, that's not how it works. So you have to, you only let go of something after you have accepted it and grieved over it and felt it all the way through. And our tradition, our story, life, death, and resurrection says this is the way. Resurrection only emerges out of death. Just like the joy I talk about in the book, I have the audacity to talk about the joy of letting go. It's a paradox. The joy only emerges after the real letting go, which comes with acceptance and grief. There is joy after. There is resurrection after. The love is an unstoppable force. And you'll discover the power of that when you've gone through the death. That's what our whole story is saying over and over again. We have to do in our own bodies and in our own life the same thing Jesus did with his own body and his own life. He showed us the way. Your own crosses, your own suffering, you have to feel it all the way through. That's why in the book, I have one thing I say is the cross is an icon of acceptance. Like, the cross is many things. It's a multitude. It's a surplus. it's resistance against the state, it's the empire, it's many things. So we could say the cross is a form of resistance to empire. It's a critique of empire. It's all those things. But one thing it is also, on an experiential level, the cross is an icon of acceptance. The acceptance of Jesus, of the pain, suffering, death, sin, evil, call it what you want, of humanity and of life into himself, and the exhausting of it, of its power, and coming through the other side. It's like he's not just making a way, he's showing us this is the way for you too. You have to do this too. You have to exhaust the power of these things within yourself. Resurrection will come. You have to do it. So that to me gets at, you can't skip over that. It's not how this works.
Yeah.
It's not magic. It's not magic.
It's not
There's no magic here.
And it seems like that's what the disciples are resisting in the entire gospel stories over and over and over again. Like it starts with this temptation in the desert with, hey, I'll give you all authority and power and kingdoms if you just, stop and worship me. And then it says that the devil left Jesus for a more opportune time. And then we see him show up again when Peter says, oh, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, yeah, now I got to go die because of that. And Peter says, may it never be so. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, and brings back that character from the desert. It's like, I cannot jump over the cross to get the resurrection. You cannot do this either. But then it ends with the resurrection, and then that promise that Satan made, if you just worship me, I'll give you all authority. Jesus says, I've gone through the cross and all authority has been given to me. And we've like that whole narrative of Matthew is that whole letting go as you're defining it, and the disciples are resisting it and trying to bypass the entire time. And they just don't get it through their brains until even after the resurrection happens.
And see, this is why Tom was, the head coach and I was the apprentice. This is why he's the big dog and I was just a little pup in the group. Because
little pup, yeah.
you just I forget what chapter it is in the book. I think it's in my book on letting go. It might be the first one. I kind of forget. But like, to make a point of what I'm saying, I used that story of what you just said.
No way.
Of Mark 8, of Peter resisting, of Jesus being like, he's like, you're the Christ, I'm going to the cross. And he's like, no. Peter's expectations on all this is what's getting in the way of the real experience of it. The expectations, now that I'm saying it, do not involve going through it. You don't go through that, so it's so funny because I use that as a real grounding story for the resistance to what we're talking about, however I said it in the book. So that's why he gets paid the big bucks.
I have yet to see those bucks. You look at Luke's gospel and it's the same story. The term redemption of Israel is used over and over again, and that means pretty much make Israel great again. Nice. In that concept. And right at the end, Jesus is resurrected is before he ascends, and the disciples look at him in the book of Acts before he ascends. It's like, is this the time you're going to restore Israel now? Like, is this the time you're going to seize the throne and boot out Rome and become the superpower? And Jesus is like, no, actually what I'm going to do is send you out away from here. And you're going to take this message of letting go, of taking up your cross, of radical love and acceptance and trust of God. You're going to take that and build communities of that as an opposition to the empire that's out there. And the book of Acts is the story of that happening and like surpassing the expectations of the disciples. Like, wait a second, Samaritans are allowed in this? They just got the Holy Spirit. Like, oh my God, now the Gentiles. This is crazy. And then Paul ends up in Rome, and he's just like, all right, we've come to the capital of the world and got the message here. And it's just like that whole expansion of the anti-empire thing, whereas the people of Israel wanted empire, they wanted to be great, they wanted to be glorious, and Jesus is like, that's not what it is. We're going to let that go, and you're going to build small communities of radical love and acceptance out there. Now go and do it. How did we miss this? As like I grew up fundamentalist in like a Pentecostal tradition, and then anti-emotion tradition. I don't even know what it was called, but it was very fundamentalist. And it was just like, how did we miss this key part? What was it in the faith that we like we didn't see this. And it's always, my faith growing up in the 80s and the 90s was all about seize the political power and make, Christianity great in America. And it's carried through. And now it's like tearing our nation apart with white nationalism and the MAGA movement. And it's just like, how did we not see this as Christians? And still, so many Christians don't see that this is the central point of the gospel.
I think human beings have a vested interest in not seeing.
Yeah.
Because it requires something of us. Letting go, divesting ourselves of power, having hard conversations, repenting, humility, whatever it is. So I think having a generic view of God support your egoic and political tendencies is really attractive. I think the way of Jesus is virtually impossible. So I think people like the former and very few people like the latter, which is why there's metaphors of, a narrow path, which for me has nothing to do with who's going to some other place called heaven and who's doing the real journey right here. And that's a narrow journey. Not who believes, but who's actually becoming and living out this way we're talking about. So that's a different thing.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, thanks so much. Like your wisdom, your writing, your perspective, your storytelling has just been a joy to be around today. How should people what is the place that you want people to buy your book from? I know you can.
Yeah, I'd say the best is just on Amazon's cool. Amazon, my author page on there, Kevin Sweeney. But my first book, The Making of a Mystic, which is more like broader, general, like wisdom, sort of fragmented through the book and more of my own personal story of my own encounter with God and my journey along the way. And then the second book, The Joy of Letting Go, both on Amazon are cool. So yeah, pick those up. I'm both very, very, very proud of both of those works, and I'm happy to have them out there. And in the midst of launching new things vocationally, I'm also like slowly, because of just the season of my life, working through my third book, which is about the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, got some new things coming, man. It's a good time. So thank you for having me on, dude. It's good to reconnect. This is just like how it was for so long.
I know. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. I don't know how to end podcasts very well, so I just hit stop and then that's it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. Make sure to go to the links in the show notes down below to check out Kevin's books, to check out Kevin's webpage, sign up for his spiritual direction if you'd like to, buy his book for sure. And yeah, it was I'm still kind of thinking about stuff here as I'm wandering around my church hall still, getting my blood moving. But I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week. We've got another great episode coming up. You're going to enjoy it very much. I promise you. And we'll see you then. Peace out.
Here you are, BPMs high, sweat dripping, body moving, tongue panting. You're working hard, real hard, and you're thirsty. You need vitamins, nutrients for peak performance and energy. And your plants do too. Aw, I mean, just look at the little guy. Water-soluble plant food from Miracle Grow is full of essential nutrients. Just a little scoop into your watering can and boom, instant feeding and bigger, more beautiful plants. It's kind of like a sports drink for your plants. You may have to suffer from heat, but your plants do not.